All right, next we're going to talk about food and water safety. In addition to having access to abundant, varied, and nutritious foods, we need our food and water supplies to be safe in order to support good health. North Americans generally enjoy a relatively safe water and food supply. However, pathogens and chemicals in both foods and water do still pose a health risk. As an overview, foodborne illness is caused by pathogens, and it is a health problem. Annually, foodborne pathogens cause 47.8 million illnesses. Though most cases go undiagnosed, a lot of times we don't even realize ourselves that we are the victims of a foodborne illness. Symptoms are generally mild GI distress, such as nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and some intestinal cramping. In the U.S., 1/4 of the population is at increased risk of foodborne illness. When contamination occurs, many people can be affected because most of the food we eat is grown on large farms, and then it's transported to processing plants or supermarkets. It's not within our own span of control to assure the safety of our own food supply. Food mishandling in food service can also cause illness. Now, the greatest risk is from contamination by viruses and bacteria, and to a lesser extent from fungi and parasites. So these microbial pathogens can lead to very serious foodborne illness. And that's going to occur when the microorganisms either directly infect the cells of our GI tract after ingesting the food, and that's considered a foodborne infection, or these microorganisms can secrete a toxin into the food that we eat, and that's considered a foodborne intoxication. So when we consume the microorganism itself, that's the foodborne infection. When we consume a food that contains toxins that were secreted by the microorganism, that's foodborne intoxication. And in some cases, both can occur, where you're consuming the microorganism itself as well as a toxin that it secreted into the food. This is an example of a poultry processing plant. So you can see here, I think pretty clearly how if there is just, say, one infected chicken, how easily it can occur that affected meat is going to be mixed up into a broader food supply, and many people can be affected, as opposed to, say, if one family raised a chicken, consumes it itself, and only that chicken, the products of the chicken are getting mixed up and therefore dispersed in a way that is hard to trace or track. So on the discussion of microbial pathogens, most bacteria and viruses causing foodborne illness do originate in an infected human or animal. And they reach food by pretty standard routes, either contamination by feces, contamination by an infected individual, or through cross-contamination. So bacteria are single-celled organisms that are everywhere. Most are harmless, but some can be pathogenic. Some common food sources of pathogenic bacteria, it's a lot of different areas of our typical diet. They include meats, poultry, eggs, fish, shellfish, dairy products, as well as fresh produce. We've got a table here from your text of bacterial causes of foodborne illness, and this is the details are just for your information. We're not going to ask you for symptoms of a particular type of foodborne illness. However, you should be able to recognize this list of bacteria. Now, bacteria need nutrients, water, and warmth to proliferate, to reproduce. Most of them, and there are some exceptions, but most grow best under the same types of environmental factors. So The danger zone temperatures are between 41 degrees and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. This is why we refrigerate foods to keep it safe, right? To keep them at temperatures lower than 41 degrees, and why we cook our food to high temperatures, those that are most susceptible to these kinds of bacteria. Cooking them to degrees higher than this will help ensure that the food is safe as well, because that bacteria cannot subsist at those extreme temperatures. Oxygen-rich environments typically allow bacteria to grow and proliferate, and non-acidic environments are usually the breeding ground for bacteria. So this is why, for instance, we can foods in an anaerobic environment, no oxygen is allowed, or we add acid to foods to preserve them. Something to keep in mind is that those high temperatures that I mentioned, they can kill toxin-producing bacteria, but they can't inactivate toxins already produced. So this is why food safety is still so important, and we'll talk more about that before the end of this chapter. But again, the heating and cooking foods can kill bacteria, but once the toxins are in the food, they can still make that food unsafe for consumption. This diagram or figure again demonstrates that danger zone where bacteria grow most quickly, and kind of gives you an idea of the effect on bacteria at different temperatures. Viruses are also a concern. They can reproduce after invading our body's cells. The key to preventing illness from viruses is to use good food safety practices. Washing hands and preventing cross-contamination are the most sort of basic and vital steps to making that happen. Here again, I am not expecting you to know specific symptoms or onset, connected to a particular virus, but do recognize the types of viruses that are associated with foodborne illness. Parasites can also lead to foodborne illness. They are organisms that live in or on another organism, and they're spread via person-to-person contact or through contaminated food, water, or soil. There are more than 80 foodborne parasites that affect humans. Protozoa are one-celled animals. Helminths are tapeworms or roundworms, and they can, they can contaminate food. Once again, we've got our table listing parasitic causes of foodborne illness. Same rules apply. You want to be familiar with these terms, recognize that they are parasites that can cause foodborne illness. Prions are infectious protein particles. The type that's probably most familiar to most people is BSE, or bovine spongiform encephalopathy, is caused by prions. And so this has been linked to fatal disease in cattle. So you've probably heard of mad cow disease, which is BSE. If transferred to humans, that is fatal brain disease. And it's similar to the Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Even when heated to high temperatures, prions remain infective. They can still, so even when that burger is completely, fully, and appropriately cooked, if the cow had this mad cow disease, then someone eating the burger made from that cow is susceptible to the disease as well. Toxins, we mentioned this before. So they're produced by molds, algae, and plants. Now, molds grow best in moist, dark environments. These form endospores on the outside of foods. So we've all seen mold probably on foods, and that you get that fuzzy, often colorful appearance. Some of the foods most likely to mold are cheese, breads, and certain types of fresh produce. Most molds adjust color, texture, taste, and odor of foods. So it's kind of obvious if a food is moldy in most cases. Some produce mycotoxins. That myco tells you mold, so it's a toxin from mold. And those cause blood disease, nervous system disorders, and kidney and liver damage. Others produce aflatoxin, and that causes liver cancer. So these toxins from mold are exceedingly dangerous. Toxins can also be found in seafoods if fish or shellfish ingest algae that has been contaminated by toxins. So those can cause foodborne illnesses as well. The fish and the shellfish are unharmed, but ingesting those foods can be very unsafe for humans. Remember, toxins are not destroyed by cooking or freezing. So even proper food safety precautions won't make those foods, if they've already been contaminated, safe to eat. In plants, we find toxins, and a variety of natural toxins that can cause illness. They're actually produced by the plants to compete with neighbors and protect themselves. But production can increase when the plant is stressed. Something called solanine production in potatoes, for instance, increases when potatoes sprout and are stored in brightly lit places. And another table from your book listing different types of toxins found in food. We'll switch gears here and talk about water safety, which is regulated by the EPA. And under the Safe Drinking Water Act, all public drinking water suppliers are required to test for contaminants. Private water suppliers, so when you're getting water from a well, those are not regulated by the EPA. And so the owner of the well should be testing for chemical and microbial contaminants to ensure that that water supply remains safe. Bottled water, those manufacturers must list the source of the water on the label. Some bottled water contains minerals and vitamins and other flavors. And keep in mind that these can be minerals and vitamins that occurred naturally, or they can be added. Bottled water can be carbonated, but all these types of bottled water are regulated by the FDA. There are threats to safe water, whether it is coming from the tap or coming from bottled water. And once again, I'll just mention that both sources should be equally safe and healthy for consumption. But again, there are threats to that safety, and these can come from agricultural runoff, inappropriate disposal of chemicals into a water supply, municipal solid waste, inadequate treatment of human wastes, or from pollution from boats and ships. So just some things to be aware of. Okay, we are going to stop here. And in the final lecture, we will discuss strategies for preventing foodborne and waterborne illness.